This park is so lucky to have these fine examples of Mahan field fortifications, the same type fortifications that were used in battlefields such as Petersburg and Vicksburg, but they were destroyed after the battle, but they left them here in pristine shape, and so they're very lucky to have such fine examples of fortifications. The troops that fought here for the Confederacy was the members of the Department of the Gulf, which included East Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama. These groups had their own commanders and were really isolated from the armies in North Virginia. The fact that Lee had surrendered in the same day did not end the Civil War. In fact, the Civil War did not end until May of that same year, 1865.
Well, the siege of these works was part of a larger siege of the entire Eastern Shore defenses, involving between 25 and 40,000 federal land forces engaged at 3 to 4 major fortifications. This siege broke because of a two-pronged reinforced federal line coming down out of the raid on Pollard, coming down out of Stockton. The troops belonging to General Steele were here for a better part of a week, working on parallels, which are fortifications, and working on gun emplacements. During that time, the Confederate Navy is patrolling up and down the river, lobbing shell into their works. This redoubt and other redoubts like it, circling the old town of Blakeley and the old docks, are lobbing shell into the Federal parallels as the Federals try to dig their trenches forward and dig other parallels closer and closer in standard siege tactics. The siege broke when the main Federal body came up to reinforce this force from their victory down at Fort Spanish. Then there was a timed, calculated frontal assault. This was the last large infantry assault on works in the war. The war east of the Mississippi would end here approximately 1 month later to the west of Mobile with the final surrender of the largest army in the eastern part of the United States. The war in the Trans-Mississippi, west of the Mississippi River, a few small skirmishes after this, and the Shenandoah steamed into port in the fall of '65, and the war was officially over. Armies did not all surrender on one day. It's just a matter of coincidence that this battle was fought the same day that Lee surrendered the Army of Northern Virginia, but he did not have authority to surrender all the forces. The Federal general operating in Mobile, after taking this fortification a day and a half later, marched into Mobile. Mobile was surrendered by the mayor. The Confederate Army departed for Meridian, Mississippi. In that ensuing month, the generals eventually met and determined a peace.
We're here for the annual reenactment of the Battle of Blakeley, which is held at the historic Blakeley State Park off of Highway 225 on the eastern shore of Baldwin County. We're here with Joanne Flirt, the director of the historic Blakeley State Park, to hear what the reenactment means to the state park and to the local economy. Ms. Flirt?
And to the reenactors. We have had people here from all over, and they are so grateful to come and reenact this battle where their ancestors fought. We had one man that came from near Chicago who was with the Illinois on the Union side. We had two guys come from Texas who their ancestors were both with the Florida unit, and so it means a lot to them.
Now, Ms. Flirt, we know that you're a state agency created by the legislature to help preserve this park. And we understand that as time has progressed, y'all have suffered some funding cutbacks from the state. And are there things that you have in the future that you're thinking about to try to promote Blakeley and bring more people to come see the reenactment and also just to come enjoy this lovely state park?
Yes, we're doing a number of things, but first we want the people in Baldwin County to know how grateful we are to the County Commission, because they have come in and helped out to try to help us get past this, what we hope is a low spot. We have broken ground for a new modern campground. There's a great demand for that, and this would be for the modern big rigs that will bring more people here. It will stop people here who are on their way between Texas and Florida and Texas. And our attendance is picking up. We do a number of things, and we're open to any suggestions.
Well, Ms. Flirt, we very much appreciate you taking the time to speak to us today and for being with us for this wonderful reenactment. The reenactors, they do a fantastic job. You do a wonderful job promoting this park, promoting the state, promoting Baldwin County. And we very much appreciate all you do to help Baldwin County be a better place to live. Thank you.
Attention, battalion. Shoulder, arms. This time, I'm going to ask the individuals whose relatives fought at this battle to step forward to give the names of their ancestors and their units. Reset! Arms! Charles Langley Hartman, 2nd New Jersey Cavalry. Thank you.
William D. McLaughlin, Company A, 67 Alabama. Robert E. Gady, 62nd Alabama, Company K.
This is a reenactment of the Battle of Blakeley that happened on April 9th, 1865. It was one of the last major engagements of the American Civil War. Robert E. Lee had surrendered on this morning on April 9th, 1865, and actually the war in the east, part of the theater, which is the Virginia area, was over, but the Western armies were still fighting. They did not have the communications they had today, and they did not know that Robert E. Lee had already surrendered. Now, technically, the war was still going on in the West, and there were a lot of battles besides Blakeley after this, but this was one of the last major battles with over 45,000 Federal troops and around 3,000 Confederates here at Blakeley. And it's just an important battle to remember. It's important for local history, and in a time when cutbacks are hurting parks, I think it's just important that the people in this area really appreciate what they've got in their own backyard and try to support it to the best that they can.
We're here with Sheila Stone to hear about what ladies and their roles were during the American Civil War on this date of the Battle of Blakeley. Ms. Stone?
Thank you. Women had several jobs that they could do in the war. The federal government paid one woman for every 10 men, a maximum of 4 per company, to be the laundress cook. It was also her job to keep the dice and the cards when the men went to battle because they didn't want to be caught dead. Gambling, it would have been a dishonor to their family. So she stayed behind when the gentlemen would go out to fight, and she would take care of the dice and the cards and their bedrolls and keep the fire going and make sure they had food when they came back. The laundress was very important. The gentleman only had probably 2 shirts and 2 sets of underwear. It was very important for her to sew and to keep them clean, keep them in good repair. They couldn't just go to Walmart and buy another pair. Another thing that the women did is participate as nurses. Now, they didn't have a medical corps until about halfway through the war. The federal government set that up, but the Confederates never really got the whole ambulance system. So you might have a man who was trained somewhat of a medic and then a woman that would assist him. The Confederate government didn't pay laundresses and seamstresses, but the gentlemen in the company would pool their money and pay them. It was occasionally a widow of someone that had been in the company, and since her husband was deceased, she no longer had an income. This was a way for her to stay solvent. Also, the women, as they traveled, if you wanted to go to Jacksonville, you just didn't get in a wagon and go. You waited until some soldiers were going, and then you'd follow them along so you'd be safe. Now, the federal government issued 1 toothbrush for every 10 men. The toothbrushes then were bone or wood handle with boar bristles. The Confederate Army did not issue toothbrushes at all to their men. The only Confederate regulation about teeth was that when you enlisted, you had to have one on top and one on bottom that lined up. This is a cartridge, and you had to be able to tear off the cartridge to pour the black powder in your gun. But during the war, as it progressed, that regulation was dismissed with, and they didn't care if you had two teeth that lined up upon reenlistment. They didn't bathe a lot then. In fact, women would use animal fat on their hair to slick it down. A woman of my age, hair would have always been very restrained, tight in the back in a bun or braided. You would have always had a hat on in public. You would have always worn mitts, because if I touched you with my bare palm, I'd have to marry you. It was indecent, just as indecent as it would be for one of the men to be seen in their suspenders. They would always have a vest or a jacket over it. They didn't bathe. They really didn't wash their hair. You got to understand, back then we didn't know about germs. We lost as many Confederates to dysentery as we did to wounds. They didn't know that you cleaned off the blade or the bone saw in between amputations and how important that was. You know, the war between the states gave us modern medicine. It was the first time they started to understand that there might be something to not have the horses and the men use the same creeks. So we learned a lot about medicine during that era, but we didn't understand it. The women that were laundresses would stand in line with the men on Saturday night in formation. They were at the back, of course, and they would get the rum ration that everybody else got. They wanted you to drink it in line because they didn't want you to hoard it or share it, and we got that too. The federal laundresses, which are the Yankees, they were Federals back then, they got the same pay that the privates got, but they didn't get battle rations. They didn't get extra food for battle, but they did get the rum rations. And the Confederate women were just paid by the troops as they could.
Well, Miss Stone, were there any other ladies that were also set here with the soldiers during camp? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, sure. During the long campaigns when the gentlemen would march across several states, of course, we wouldn't have been there. You need a wagon to transport these laundry barrels, and none of the privates are willing to carry one around. We would have always been in the garrisons, but if they had done a cross-country march or like a 3 or 4 day forage into an area, we would have stayed back, and then they would have come back to us. But it would have been impossible for the women to follow the troops in all the situations that they went. Of course, the women were at a disadvantage because you didn't know where the troops were. So you would stay in a garrison type situation like this with the tents and then hope that they or another unit would come by.
Well, Miss Stone, we appreciate very much the time you've taken to speak to us about camp life in the American Civil War and how ladies interacted during that time period. We appreciate your knowledge, and thank you so very much for taking the time. Thank you.
Attention, battalion. Shoulder, arms. Fire by battalion.
Sergeant Bishop Battalion.
Battalion, ready. High elevation, aim. Fire. Shoulder. Oh.
Well, this battle took place after the naval battle that people call the Battle of Mobile Bay. And this fort was built to withstand, in fact, it was supposed to be instrumental in defeating the Union Navy as they came through and took the bay. And when the bay fell, then the Marines were sent over here to garrison one of the artillery pieces, actually at the southeast corner of Fort Morgan. And there was an actual Marine stationed here. The Union infantry landed about 2 miles down at Navy Cove, and they slowly advanced on the fort. The fort was garrisoned with 450 men, and they were well equipped, well rationed, but the Navy bombarded from Navy Cove from the north into the southern part of the fort, and the infantry advanced, and they put us under siege, and it was about a week and a half, 2 weeks, and the fort finally just, it caught on fire. There was a citadel that caught on fire, and once it caught on fire, there was no place to keep people. It was unsafe. Everybody would have been massacred, so we surrendered. And many of us would be paroled, and in fact, our unit, I understand, is paroled, and we're going to be sent to Fort Blakeley. In actuality, that's what happened. So we would again fight at Fort Blakeley and be captured there at the fall of Fort Blakeley, and then we'd be released as the war was over, which would be over from this date in about 8 months. So this battle really, it signaled pretty much the end of the Civil War as we knew it, and when Blakeley and Mobile fell, then the war was over. In fact, Blakeley fell on the exact day that General Lee surrendered Appomattox. So there's a great deal of history here, and it's a story that not many people know, and it's Baldwin County, and they should know the story, because a lot of people live in Baldwin County, their ancestors fought here, and Blakeley and Gaines, so it's a good thing to know what Grandpa did.
Well, we were portraying dismounted cavalry. The 3rd Maryland Dismounted Cavalry took part in the fall of Fort Gaines, and there were some dismounted cavalry units over here at Fort Morgan as well. And this was actually a siege type of battle with bombardment, shelling of the fort. But the Union Army did press up. They had sappers digging trenches, getting closer, and bringing up the siege guns. And at some point, this would have happened. The Union Army would have assaulted the walls and gone over it had not the fort surrendered first.
I think it would be really nice to have a lot more people to come out to be able to see how hard we work to preserve such a beautiful era in America's history. And I think they would have a lot more patriotism for this country if they did. We do try really hard to portray it as best we can, and it's gratifying. It's definitely great.
As for Fort Morgan, you can see that the fort itself has survived, and it's now a tribute to all of those brave men that fought against it. When the war was over, the majority of the Southerners and the majority of the Northerners more or less made peace. The war was done. Our patron, General Lee, told us we were Americans again, we were one country, be good citizens. We tried our best. Places like this are sacred places. We've got to protect them. We've got to come and look at them and think about what happened.
Held annually in mid-April of each year, the Siege of Fort Morgan is reenacted here at the fort, located at the tip of the Fort Morgan Peninsula in Baldwin County, Alabama. We're here with Gabriel Rains, the General of the Torpedo Bureau at the fort, to hear about today's activities and what the Siege of Fort Morgan was like in 1864. General?
Yes, actually, following Farragut's attempt to enter the bay, wherein he met with some of my devices in the water beside the fort, they had a land engagement. The forces of the federal troops landed about 3,000 men back down toward what is now Gulf Shores and proceeded to march on the fort. As they did, they discovered a device that they were familiar with called a subterra shell. This is one of those devices right here. This is my invention. The subterra shell, today known as a landmine, took 7 pounds of pressure by any source, and especially a foot placed on it, and it exploded, and generally vaporizing the man who stepped on it. It would totally destroy them. Colonel Lucas landed approximately 3,000 troops from Fort Morgan in the direction of what is now Gulf Shores on the peninsula. He proceeded toward the fort with those troops. Inside the fort were some 400 troops. However, when he arrived at the fort, he discovered these devices, and he would not attack the fort. They could only cut off the supply routes and set siege to the fort. Well, by setting siege to the fort, they stopped income of any supplies, including water, which was very, very important. The troops inside the fort then were faced with the bombardment. The ships that had entered the bay then turned around in the north end of the fort and started a bombardment of the fort from the sea. And this bombardment lasted nearly 20, well, actually, the 5th of August was the day they entered the bay. The 23rd of August was the day the fort surrendered. When they got into the bay and started the bombardment, they dismounted all the guns on the fort. And eventually they did hit the magazine inside the fort and destroyed all of the powder that he had to repel the forces. General Page had not placed sufficient supplies in the fort for a siege. His opinion was that there's no maritime man. He was an ex-ship captain, by the way, before he was a brigadier general. There's no ship mariner that will ever try to enter this bay due to the fact of the pilings that have been placed between Fort Gaines and Fort Morgan, narrowing the channel, and the channel was heavily mined with my devices. But they did. The Tecumseh fell to one of my devices. The Tecumseh being a 800-ton twin-gun turreted monitor. When the Tecumseh hit the mine, it blew the Tecumseh nearly 25 feet out of the water and in half. It went down in some 14 seconds. The complement of 150 men on board, officers and men, 6 survived. The rest lay off of the point out here, marked by a buoy at their location. During our reenactment this weekend, we had a salute to them. We did a ceremony over the grave site, our watery grave site of the Tecumseh crew, in honor of them. We honor men of good conscience on both sides in this war. We fought north or south. But back to my impersonation is that I do the bureau commander of the Torpedo Bureau, who invented these landmines and this device. This device is my instant fuse. It has a compound on top of, this is a fixture here that it fits into. This has a compound placed on top of a column of flash powder. When 7 pounds of pressure is applied to this compound, it ignites. I don't know if you've ever tried to throw a kitchen match onto a pavement or not, but if you do, it will strike. It will start a fire. That's similar to this compound. This is just a little more volatile. That has no mechanical device necessary to ignite the main charge. All it takes is pressure. And that made it the best fuse system ever devised. These devices in the bay were fused with these fuses. Consequently, during the Battle of Mobile Bay, there were some 5 ironclads and tinclads sank by these devices. Not just the Tecumseh, 4 others, 2 tinclads and 3 ironclads, Tecumseh being 1, and 7 support ships and troop ships sank in Mobile Bay by these devices. The fort here at Morgan was never attacked by troops, although it has a glacis, which is a embankment against the fort wall, which helps protect it from bombardment by cannon, but it also allows egress and access to the fort because you can walk up it, except for the landmines. Also in the bay, Fort Blakeley was surrounded by these devices. Recently, in the year, I'm not certain, it was 1989 or 1988, they discovered one of these devices still planted at Fort Blakeley. So they called in the Corps of Engineers fearing that it might be active, and they destroyed it. General Raines developed many devices throughout his career as the Torpedo Bureau commander, but these devices were the ones used at this location. So I'm here, as General Raines was, 1 month before the siege, inspecting my devices, making sure that they're in good working order, and also relocating a few for a more efficacious use in the battle.
Well, General, we appreciate the time you've given us today and your distinguished family history and their contributions here during the siege of Fort Morgan, as well as the nation, its military history. And we appreciate all the time the reenactors have put into helping promote Baldwin County, helping promote our nation's history. The money they spend, the time that they take away from their families, it's all for a good cause. And we hope it inspires citizens to be more patriotic and enjoy their history and are challenged by it. We thank you.